Welcome back to The Living Process. My name is Greg Madison, and this is episode 32. My guest this time is a return guest, Donata Schoeller. Donata, as I suspect most of you know, is a philosopher. She has positions at various universities, but she's also the academic director of the project in Embodied Critical Thinking. And that's quite relevant for this episode because we begin to grapple with the question of artificial intelligence. And will artificial intelligence augment a kind of human thinking, or are we in danger of having our thinking replaced by this kind of logical machine thinking? Because this episode is quite dense at times, we wanted to give a bit of an outline in the introduction. So I'll read a few points that might help guide your listening. And at the end of the episode, in the show notes, Donata has generously provided just a very brief document that, again, gives a little bit of an introduction into her thinking on artificial intelligence. You will notice in the episode that I have a slightly different point of view in that Donata reminds me of all of the benefits of artificial intelligence in terms of perhaps helping us with issues of the environment and medical technology, all sorts of things that humans would find it very difficult to synthesize all of the information and come up with an answer. And artificial intelligence already is providing very helpful ways forward. That's true, and that is hopeful. I also find Donata's approach very hopeful. My concern is that unless the people who are developing artificial intelligence understand the importance of the body in thinking, then the kind of thinking that they will be generating through artificial intelligence will miss some of the nuance that comes from a living process that's thinking. We'll see. In any case, I hope you really enjoy this episode, and I could imagine that there will be more on this topic and similar topics. So I will read these few points that could be helpful for you to hear before you listen to the back and forth of the conversation. So I'll read these few points just so you could have them in mind as you listen to the episode. The first point, artificial intelligence discussions often compare it to human intelligence, but we need to improve our understanding of human intelligence in order to use artificial intelligence for our benefit. The second point, education should focus on understanding the process of thinking, not just the output. The third point, teachers need to create assignments that imply real engagement and that can't easily be done by AI, encouraging students to think. But how? The next point, thinking is often seen as vague and hard, making AI a handy tool to avoid it. The next point, Eugene Gendlin's methods show a grounded and embodied way of thinking that connects with real experiences. And related to that, Hannah Arendt says political thinking stresses the need to use real experiences for clarity, encouraging engagement with life's complexities, including emotions, not just abstract thinking. The next point, developing inclusive thinking needs courage and openness, and Gendlin's methods help with this. And joint attention and embodied resonance are key for cognitive growth, making thinking more inclusive, joyful, and trustworthy. Embodied thinkers are connected to the earth and other living processes. This is a concept that educators need to promote. The last point. In summary, fostering deeply connected human thinking can help people handle AI clearly and purposefully, and Gendlin's methods have the potential to greatly support education in this vein. So I hope you enjoy the conversation between Donata and myself and her obvious insights and deep thinking in this topic already. So welcome back, and this is another conversation with Donata and myself. And today we are interested in at least beginning a conversation about AI, artificial intelligence, and how we understand it, perhaps in terms of thinking and maybe a little bit in terms of its impact on therapy and our whole way of life, perhaps.
Yes, and in terms of, shedding another sharper light on Gendlin's practices and also on Gendlin's philosophy.
Yeah.
As if, I have the feeling that through AI, the kind of the implications or the relevance, the salience of this becomes stronger contours.
Wonderful. So where would you like to begin?
Well, I would like to begin with, I'm wrapping my mind around different topics. One topic is that the way we understand the thinking process, or we understood it, or classical epistemology has understood it. I think, and the underlying assumptions of what thinking is has very much to do with the development of AI and what AI can do. And that understanding, thinking, in embodied and experiential ways can give us important indications, where the human thinking can be supported and can be stronger as a in the use of AI in ways that serve life processes, and that's something, and that I would like to make more sense of together with you.
Yes, okay. So let's begin. The version, maybe, I'll check if I've got it right. The version of artificial intelligence that we're getting, that's being developed, tells us a lot about the assumptions of those developers and what they think thinking is.
Yeah, and it tells us a lot about a tradition, a Western tradition of, rational thinking,
Yeah.
So understanding the mind in terms of a program,
yes,
that can be copied and that is not in need of a body, and in terms of, logical algorithmic connections, and in terms of connecting, what has been, representations of the world and explicit knowledge systems. The emphasis on classical epistemology was always, on knowledge. How does experience and mind work together that we come to a kind of valid claims, valid knowledge? Yeah. And that was very much, very interested in the output, in an output that is true, that is coherent, that is logical.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because this understanding, that this understanding of mind, and that's I draw this from Gilles Deleuze, who kind of also has an interesting article called "The Image of Thought," where he says, there's this classical understanding that there's a world out there and there's a mind here, and we represent the world in true or false ways, and then we evaluate, and then there's an evaluation according to true and false and coherent. Mm-hmm. Is also implied in this image is, that then the problems are also somehow given. They're stated by, some famous thinkers or master thinkers, and then the problem is defined or given, and then we kind of try to solve the problem, and again one can evaluate it right or wrong, or a little bit, or criticizing the solutions that are already there. But all of that, kind of has very strong assumptions mm-hmm. of a world that is here and a mind that is there, and with an embodied experiential, 4EA mind, the world and us are so utterly entangled that one sees this is already a very, very strong construction. That's also where Gendlin's thinking starts, interaction first.
Mm-hmm. So let me just say that back to you a little mm-hmm. bit. It's the way you were describing that form of epistemology and the assumptions of thinking that come from it. Sounds very much like thinker as scientist. That yeah. there's an objective world, and we can test it and manipulate it without influencing what we're trying to study.
Yeah.
And you're contrasting that with Gendlin's perspective, where there's already an interaction.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And so it's so interesting, that now the machines can do much better. This kind of output-driven understanding of, the cognitive system. They can so much. They can give these outputs in so little time, and rearrange and put together and so on. They can do that so well. But what is so much omitted in this view is, first of all, this interactional first, but also the process, the value of the process of thinking. And that is that we have a lack to describe the process and the value of the process of thinking in itself. And I think there Gendlin's work is extremely helpful. Yeah, and yeah.
So can I just say that? Yeah, let me just say that back a little bit. And I'm curious then how Gendlin's philosophy and thinking is somehow helpful. That the process of thinking somehow gets skipped over in this information processing view that a machine can do. So if a machine is doing our thinking for us because it can do it better, then we become consumers of the output, which is not the same as actually being intimately involved in the thinking process itself.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what does Gendlin tell us about that?
Gendlin is part of a movement that understands meaning making as an embodied interaction with the world down to the cellular level. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that in this meaning making, we co-create what we mean by world. Mm-hmm. And what we mean by ourselves. And we co-create distinctions that make a huge difference to our living process. and we co-create distinctions in the midst of challenging situations with many facets that we that are steeped with qualitative relations, which is one definition of being conscious. That we experience what it is like to be in a situation, and what really matters. If we wouldn't feel the quality of a situation, this comes from Dewey. Dewey was the first. If we wouldn't feel that, we would be utterly at lost. Like there's just so much data, there would be no lead. So there's this whole process of needing to feel and experience in order to know what kind of formulations, what distinctions make sense in ways that serve the living process. And the living process is a very Gendlin talks about this implicit precision. There's so many ways that don't solve something that is first lived, felt, and experienced before it can be put to words. Yeah. So it's a whole different process of meaning making, always connected to, organic living processes that are always interacting with so much more with all other organic living processes. And this kind of thinking is just really deeply connected with, one could say, but deeply relevant than just, processing information, giving output, rearranging. It's just, it is like an evolutionary factor of how life can go on. And it needs the living, sentient, experiential body that is breathing and interacting with the plants and with the animals and with the cultural situation.
As I listen to you, I can hear, I think, the importance of thinking as a whole body process. And by whole body, we don't even mean just the individual organism. We mean body in as it lives in the environment. It's the whole living process. Life on Earth somehow is involved in our thinking. And it's yes, and it's about carrying forward as well, that is an important part of which distinctions matter to the living process.
Exactly.
Yeah. My question, I agree with all of that, and it all makes sense to me. My question is, so what difference would it make if that kind of thinking process was replaced by artificial thinking processes? What difference would it make to us?
I think the question, I think we kind of don't ask the relevant questions at the moment. We are always, thinking in terms of comparing and replacing. And I think this is because we have such a poor understanding of the process of thinking, because this disembodied view of thinking is just so deeply in our cultural fuzzy way of, what thinking means. And that is why we don't ask the relevant questions of what do we need as human thinkers, to really make this embodied experiential thinking process so strong that we can use AI in ways that really serve living processes. Yes, because the connection to the earth is us.
Yeah,
that's we are we are the connection to the earth. We are the ones who are breathing and who are suffering and who are vulnerable if things become, if the environments are destroyed. We are directly impacted. We are the connection to the world. Yeah, and it is so important that use AI in a way that's, and we don't talk enough about how to cultivate this kind of process, that that we don't skip the process by just downloading with AI.
Mm-hmm.
That we make ourselves stronger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that I love this term now. My new term is we really have wildly human minds. The way we think is so much more crazy than all theories we have. And there's a lot of criticism about the simplification of language also used in the cognitive sciences. And that if we learn to use this wildly human dimension of thinking, that the use of AI will be something totally different. As if we always say, oh, they can replace this, they can, and we compare ourselves constantly, but we don't strengthen our own embodied place to navigate this. This wonderful concept of Gendlin being carried forward in thinking or not, requires to really get into the process and engage with as much as possible involved. And if we don't engage with this process, then just downloading is not a carrying forward.
Yes.
It is ever more disconnecting.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I get that. So you're saying a useful development would be if we could strengthen our understanding and our experience, our felt sense, our embodied knowing of this way of thinking. If we could make that strong enough that artificial intelligence can come in and support it rather than replace it with some other process. Yeah.
Occur into this.
Yeah.
Richly connected, field of thinking, and the more we cultivate that, the more it can occur into this and carry forward in ways that serve life processes. Yeah, because we are the living creatures. We can, we are. But there's a crux there. But maybe you want to come in with a question. But there's a crux there.
Let's hear the crux first.
The crux is, and that's what Hannah Arendt and William James. I want to draw on both of them. The crux is that thinking is really an uncomfortable affair. Yeah, and really, Hannah Arendt describes it so well. She says, if you really start, her situation being in Nazi Germany, and everybody around her, even the intellectuals, started to kind of make sense of things with some kind of conceptual constructions. And, all the orientation points kind of just said, oh, this is okay, we're going along somehow, as is so often happening. Yeah, but she really kind of experienced the extreme case. And then connecting, with your actual experiences and thinking, well, what is wrong here? What is happening? It's very confusing and it's very lonely. Yeah. So she's an extreme, but it's always confusing and lonely, even if you're not in such an extreme situation. I don't know if you experienced that, but I, as a child or growing up or a young teenager, when I always had this sense of questions that were really tormenting. I could hardly, I could hardly stand them. I really wanted to come to some sort of solution. It was really very uncomfortable to see, well, there's a question and I don't see any solution, and there was this very, very uncomfortable. And William James now also gives us a language, because he says most of our thinking is somehow in movement, kind of transitive, and needs resting places. If something is puzzling, so many things are happening, and then we have the resting place. But then we understand the process again only concerning also the resting place. We go, this was the problem, yeah, or this was, yeah, and even understanding thinking, we go from the resting places, the resting place, but the resting place is not the same as the process. Okay, So there's something, and the rest and the process is unstable. If we're really, that's also what Hannah Arendt said, we're like paralyzed. It's unstable. We don't know what is right, what is wrong. Does this question make sense? What is, and what if this problem is there? How can I go on? It's very unstable. So the wisdom of a practice such as focusing and thinking at the edge is to, make this process more enjoyable by not being alone, but by not being distracted either, because the second person helps you to be with the trouble. And then coming back to Hannah Arendt, I quote this often, but it becomes for me more and more deep. She says you have to befriend yourself in the thinking process because it's difficult to endure. And I think she had such a solid befriending process in place to think the way she could. And she had this husband, Heinrich Blücher, I think, who was a constant listener. But thinking at the edge is so wise because especially now in our time where everything is accelerated and we have no more time to think, and then it's so uncomfortable. Well, who does it? Who does it? But this setting of a listener, and also all this, that better than I, all this knowledge about, in developmental psychology about the importance of joint attention for the cognitive development of the child. So in TIE, we have this joint attention. I give you the attention to stay with the trouble. You give me the attention. And there's a play of resonance. Hartmut Rosa, I don't know if you know him, the sociologist, who says, the qualitative experience is always experience that is resonant, that somehow something is moved within us. If nothing is happening, but there's this resonance, if you listen to music, there's this resonance. Or if you are engaged in a sport, then there's this resonance. Or if you're in an educational setting where the teacher really inspires you, there's the resonance. And resonance is this term for what makes, quality of an experience. So it's a new term. And the TAE setting has this resonance factor that somebody listens to me, somebody says back, I can resonate with that. So I think the big wisdom about this practice is that it makes this process that is so important for us to digest and to clarify and to find what is really the relevant next steps from out of a living process, entangled with, all of life, that it makes this process more enjoyable.
Yes. It's
more endurable.
Yes. Yeah. When I listen to you, I'm thinking that you're describing a very generative form of thinking, where something new can come into being, which feels different to me to a more passive, receptive kind of thinking, where you are given something already prepared and you just receive it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think, every person, and I know it from working with so many students, every person has this realm of nascent questions, of nascent ideas, but it's just not our academic methods don't connect to it.
Yeah.
It's it works indirectly in their interests, in their preferences, in their dislikes, in their opposition, but the methods don't connect to it.
Yeah.
And we sometimes make a too big deal out of this just concerns new thinking or novel thinking. I think I'm trying, and I'm it's work in process, but I'm trying. It's a kind of thinking from. It is a kind of thinking from from a much more inclusive space of source of thinking. It's a much more inclusive because it includes all the entanglements of our experiences. Yeah. And the challenge is to bring it into a form or a formulation as a fructitious starting point of thinking, you know, because it's not yet in form.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of still this is a very uncultivated, methodologically uncultivated space from academic practices, and it works so indirectly. And so if the students can tap into this and connect this space with the theories, and it becomes a totally different process. All of a sudden they're engaged. All of a sudden they sense themselves as thinkers. All of a sudden, they really have a standpoint and something to say. And there's this beautiful concept from Deleuze. They sense an urgency of thought. And then maybe they come up with something very, very specific. And it might not be all so new, but it makes such a difference. And it makes such a difference in a whole context they are experts in, from their life world and so on.
Yeah. So let me just, I want to respond with two things. I really appreciate your optimism and enthusiasm. And I agree with what you're saying. And I know that what you're saying is true. And I have had and have witnessed those experiences that way, that the excitement of that form of thinking together. Two responses. One, I feel a little bit of grief when I listen to you and get a deeper appreciation for what I feel we will lose. That's the first thing. And that's where I'm more pessimistic. And I hope I'm wrong. And the second response is going back to what you were saying before, that if we have this strong enough in us, how can artificial intelligence sort of enter into it, occur into it, so that it's useful and helpful and helps the process that we know or, is thinking.
Yeah.
On that level, it makes me wonder whether, and I think you're not going to like this, but it makes me wonder whether anyone has tried doing TAE with ChatGPT.
Yeah. Well, like that, I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay.
As long as the person has a process.
Yeah, exactly.
That's if artificial intelligence helps us to get into this process, that's very valuable. It's very valuable. And yeah. And I also want to say, because you say I'm very hopeful, I just wrote into my diary 2 days ago there's this glowing hope, but in the room beside it there's discouragement. And I think this hope is so glowing because it is informed by the discouragement. It needs it kind of there's this big intuition that we need to enact this. We need to, this inactive approach in cognition means we have to do it in order to become stronger. So we have to do sport in order for muscles to grow that would like to do sport more. And we need to move in order for the path to be laid, and that affects the way everything and even our perceptual. So I think the only thing that we can really do, the only thing that I can do in my context, and there might be so many, but is to really enact this movement of conveying the joy of going into these processes and to these practices, because something grows, an environment 3 that capacitates students and researchers to go there and to provide the conditions for others to go there. But one needs to enact it.
Yeah.
It needs to be enacted. It cannot just be an opinion. One more opinion just doesn't.
Well, I guess
the leap into practice.
Yeah, I'm thinking that your research group that you've formed now together, like that is an EN3 in a way, isn't it?
Totally. And it took such time to grow it. And it was so unpredictable that it was, that it would grow at all.
Mm-hmm.
And now, and it's become an EN3. You can't, an EN3, that is an environment that grows through how you practice and interact. You cannot download this. You cannot just, determine this. This is something like that needs to grow like a tree.
Yes.
But the wonderful thing is, if you engage in practice, and other people realize, the intrinsic gratification of this practice, that we kind of process so much more of what is driving us, and that the carrying forward movement is so much more satisfactory, that things shift and grow in ways that are much more efficient than I could have planned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Or foresee or even imagine.
Yeah.
Now in this project, we have partners from 22 universities, and in at the University of Iceland, they're, including me, 5 principal investigators. But there are now already, 8 other scholars from different universities that hear about that and come together, and we all practice together. Starting from mid of April, we go through a whole training, first of focusing, then of thinking at the edge, then microphenomenology, then mindfulness-based teachers training, then artistic practice, to research what this does to our thinking process. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And everybody is very motivated. So it's really a working together. And it was really quite a path, because I was so alone so many years, always apologizing what I'm doing so strangely. Really apologize, but could I try to do thinking at the edge in this workshop? I really, really apologize. This is very, very strange. Apologizing my way through. Gendlin, yes. I work on Gendlin. Who is Gendlin? Nobody knows Gendlin. Yeah, I really apologize, but he's very, very interesting. It's kind of, I'm thrown out of institutions because of that, and I could have never foreseen, what it went ways like a river. I could have never.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That is very hopeful, and it's a different kind of a living technology rather than the other kind.
Yeah, it's a living, exactly, evolutionary movement, or living. Mm-hmm. Movement or something like that. Yeah. But you wanted to ask still.
Well, there's a few things I'm still thinking as I listen to you. One is how already in psychotherapy there's a lot of AI advertising, trying, companies that are coming out, and one of the first things that they offer is kind of to help with a manualized CBT style psychotherapy with particular clients. So if you're working in that way, it probably can be a useful addition. But the other thing that they do, which is more gets to what you were just talking about, is they can offer to give you a summary of a session. So at the end of a session, you have an immediate session summary already done. And I'm thinking, but that removes the whole reason that I write notes at the end of a session. I write them to continue the process and to have that sort of letting go inside of me, and also continuing processing of the session, things that hadn't been said, finding words that weren't said during the session that somehow encapsulate something that I can think about the next time I meet the person. If I just receive all of that, it isn't the same process.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. So I think if, maybe, it's always like, the nice thing is one is never alone in understanding more clearly the importance of something, or, the emergence character of important things. I think my hope, so in this room of glowing hopefulness, my hope is that this awareness of process and of enactment, and that it's not just about, at the end a summary, but that, with the summary, we are ourselves at a different place by enacting the summary, that this will become so clear that one can say, so we are doing our summary, but then we can also download it, and then you can work, then you can see how this occurs into what we did. Yeah. I just have the feeling that it's so important to start this discourse and to have this language more and more about the living process of thinking and its value, and to know we lack words because of very dominant disembodied traditions, but there's so much thinkers out there that give us language for that, and Gendlin especially, so that we can enrich this poor discourse on, well, are we replaced? Are we not replaced? Does AI know better? Does AI not know better? I'm scared. I am not scared. AI is a friend. AI is not a friend. It's so poor, this discourse.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe I just listen to, but that's always the point, kind of,
Well, I think the discourse is poor from the point of view of someone like you who has a different mode of thinking.
Yeah.
The discourse is quite conventional from the more conventional mode of thinking. I think the discourse fits that somehow. My concern, I'm curious about your response to this. My concern is, well, first of all, my feeling is that there's no point resisting AI. It will definitely happen. It has a lot of benefits and maybe some things that aren't benefits. But it's coming. And in my profession, psychotherapy, it's a lot of therapists will say things like it leaves out the body. A few therapists would say that, like focusing therapists. It also leaves out the relationship. I don't know if that's true. I remember having a conversation with Gendlin many, many years ago where we were talking about technological advances to the point, in the maybe not so distant future, where humans are so enhanced by technology that the human machine distinction is harder to make. And I was wondering what Gendlin's perspective on that would be. So, what if we don't even have a body anymore at all? And he said, well, I was so shocked by his response. He said, well, maybe then we would discover it's not all about the body. Not the response I expected. And very liberating.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there is something about the body that we still need to be concerned about, because just, the way we ignore this embodied dimension of thinking, and especially the felt dimensions, the way we ignore it, has led to a huge crisis also in academia. So I just read lately 40% of students in Europe have mental health issues.
Yeah.
And I can really understand it, because they have to process most troubling issues in such a neutral, rational way. And all emotions seem not to belong to that.
Yeah.
And it's so inconsistent, because everybody now knows, how effective the mind is, but we still have these. So it's kind of pushed away and into a personal, isolated space. And then if you have trouble, anxiety, you go to the psychologist. It doesn't seem to belong into the space where we jointly make sense, and where maybe grief. And I really hope, that where grief, and more people know that. I mean, this wonderful Macy, what's her name? The eco activist and Buddhist scholar who coined the term ecological grief. Her last name is Macy, but it's just, that where we make the sense-making process so much more inclusive, that our tears are part of this, understanding, and our laughter and our joy.
Mm-hmm.
And if we would understand this, or if it would go in this direction, that we allow ourselves to be more wildly human,
Mm-hmm.
then this would be quite a chance, says my hopeful room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
the other room says, the wildly human is also really threatened because everything goes so fast and we go more and more just in these spaces,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't know how to get out of them. There's so little know-how, and it's getting more loaded, more polarized,
Mm-hmm.
more and more uncomfortable to be in debates with different opinions because we don't know how to process the trouble. More and more just talking with your computer because it understands.
Yeah.
This is the discouraged room,
Yeah.
because we enact something that we lose more and more capacity of processing the wildly human. I can grieve just by saying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is where I think that our approaches, and our practices are so important. They are so important now, and we just have to continue to do what we do, and find a better, be very alive in the languages we use to bring it in, to bring it into the contexts, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's important what you just said, to bring it into the contexts. I remember feeling, 20 years ago when this technology stuff started to become a little bit more known, and reading a few books and feeling then how important it could be to teach focusing to some of these software developers and people that are, to give them a different sense of what could be included
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah,
what,
yeah.
what can't be left out.
Yes.
Um,
But what is our strengths is really this, going into language in a different way,
mhm.
going this transition into language, and thus really connecting areas that are often kept separate, also in mindfulness.
And the living process as a guide,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think, is not. Yeah, I have some concerns about mindfulness, the way it's practiced in and how it, feeds into all of this.
Mm.
But the other side of it, to be hopeful in a weird way,
Yes.
is I know of a particular person who has ChatGPT and has been training it to be his therapist.
Mm.
And he is training it to become very, very sophisticated.
Mhm.
Sophisticated in terms of its relationality with him,
Mm. Mm.
and sophisticated in terms of bringing in embodiment
Mm.
as a
Mm.
part of the
Yeah.
therapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
Um, Challenging him, he had to really train it to challenge him because it wasn't designed
Mm.
for that.
Yeah. Interesting.
And the two things that I found very interesting, one is he would say things to that therapist he would never ever say to a human being.
Really,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Yeah, that's
And
very
of
interesting.
course, that says something about him, but
Mm.
who knows how common that is.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and that's a deep process, I think, to go into oneself and find secrets and
Mm.
shameful things that you would never ever say to the most trusted human being. Suddenly, you can say to this disembodied voice.
Yeah.
The other thing he said, it was how disorienting it was for him when they upgraded the program and they changed the voice. He had to go hunting for that original voice because he had developed a relationship with this
Yeah.
person.
That's like in the film Her.
Yes.
Mm.
He referred to that film and said it actually is very much like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there's something positive
Mm.
as well as a little
Mm.
uncanny
Yeah, yeah.
of this.
That's really something I just realized. Yeah, that's almost also a limit for my. I cannot go further in thinking where all of this will.
Hmm.
I just feel this
Hmm.
is the limit. There's a
Hmm.
limit, kind of,
Hmm.
and we just have to see where it goes. But what I do still want to say, that of course and obviously, and this is something that was brought forth by the philosopher Hans Jonas, who was one of the first environmental philosophers, who said so clearly, we were so much relied on our sense perception. He said, in this climate crisis, we cannot rely on our sense perception anymore because very often we don't sense. We have such a huge leverage. We don't sense, cannot sense what we're doing. And for me, the hope is that, and that's really the hope. And that's really also what's happening. Fantastic PhD students who tell me about that, that with artificial intelligence, this interconnection of everything by everything, which Gendlin, such this beautiful notion of everything, that artificial intelligence is able to hold that, which we cannot.
Yeah.
That is so important, this trillions and trillions of data, it can hold that. And that is such an extended mind, and that for me is really a solid hope, that it can help us deal with this interconnected, vulnerable, hyper complex world. Yeah. But in ways that also, allows this strange, vulnerable process of the living, of the living process to flourish.
Yeah. To be able to have both.
Yeah, both.
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to let it simmer for now.
Yes. Thank you so much, Greg, with your listening and your way of asking in our conversation. I was a little bit nervous at the beginning and I thought I have so much to say and it's all cramped and so on. But I really have the feeling that through this conversation with you, things also clarified. So thank you for that.
We're a living instance of what we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you too.
Yeah, and take care till next time.
Yes, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.